Hi, this is Kelly from Cozy Reader Kelly, and I want to share with you today my mid-May wrap-up. And I only read 4 books in the first half of May, but at least one of them I had a lot of feelings about, and I didn't think I wanted to wait till the end of May to share those feelings. And I didn't want to do a whole video on just that book, so I'm just going to go ahead and share these 4 books in a little more detail, and then I'll do the rest of May at the end of the month. So let's start with the first book. And the first book, sorry, I'm trying to hold the book up and hold the baby up at the same time. So the first book is Obsidio by Amie Kaufman and Kristoff. This is the 3rd book in the Illuminae Files series. It's very shiny. And I thought that this was a really good conclusion to the trilogy. I'm obviously not going to go into a lot of detail about what happens in this book, but overall it's a space adventure about a planet who is invaded because they're an illegal mining planet, and they're kind of taken over by this corporation and kind of the fight for the lives of the civilians and everybody from the planet. And so it goes through the 3 stories. In each story we focus on new characters. So by the time we got to this 3rd book, I didn't like it as much as the first 2. I mean, I still gave it 5 stars. I gave all 3 5 stars. But this one I think was a little bit less plot than the other ones, because even though we had new characters to follow, we were still getting information about our past characters, and all the storylines were converging together. And because of that, I think the plot for this one suffered a little bit compared to the other 2, because there was so much that we had to wrap up and so many things we had to get together, so we couldn't just focus on the 2 main characters for this one. So that was the only kind of downside. Other than that, I think it's a really fun series. I like the way it's written in the files and pictures and all that stuff. And there's a lot of twists that some I see coming, but some I didn't see coming. And there's some books that center around war. There's not a lot of high stakes, and you're like, oh, well, everybody's going to turn out okay. Well, in this one, there's a lot of death, and there's a lot of real war happening and bad stuff going on, so that makes it more realistic. There's a little bit of romance to lighten it up, and some funny parts with the main characters are all teenagers, so there's a little bit of humor and stuff in that. And then there's a lot of action, and that's what I like. It's just like, you start out getting to the story, and then once you're in it, usually by page 100 for all of them, it just felt like I read the next like 500 pages in one sitting, usually for each book. So it flies by really fast because of all the action. And then the next book I read was Prince in Disguise by Stephanie Kate Strohm. And this is just a YA romance book. I gave it 3 stars. I thought it was really cute. It's about a girl from America who, her sister was in a reality TV show called Prince in Disguise. And so this takes place after that show. So it's not a sequel, just that happens before the plot starts. So she's already like won the reality show and is engaged to the Prince in Disguise prince, because he's like a lord, he's not really a prince. And so now the reality show is leading up to their wedding. So that's where this book is taking place, and we focus on the sister, who is the younger teen sister to the one that's getting married. And the wedding is taking place at the Lord's manor in Scotland. So we're like, oh, so the setting's cute in Scotland, and so she's kind of, since she's a teen from America, she's kind of getting involved with like the culture of the area. And then the whole reality show aspect is kind of fun and moves the plot along, adds some drama in to make it not just a plain, teen romance, so it adds a little action in there. And then the love interest was adorable. Like, his name is Jamie, and he's just super cute and like kind of nerdy and quirky. And what I really loved about it is he just frequently quotes books or poems, or I mean, even the movie Frozen he quotes. So he throws in a lot of like cute little book fan things in there, and so I think that's kind of makes it an interesting aspect. But other than that, it's very basic in terms of a romance. You know exactly where it's going and everything. So overall it's pretty forgettable, so that's why I rated it 3 stars, because even though it was a fun read and I enjoyed it, I'm sure in like 3 months I'll have no idea what happened, because it'll all just fly out of my head. It's not memorable at all. And the next book is Persepolis. This is actually Persepolis 2. I read Persepolis 1 earlier this month, but I had to return it to the library, and when I returned it, I immediately got Persepolis 2. But it looks pretty much the same, except for number 1 has a red cover. And this is all about a girl. This is by Marjane Satrapi, by the way. And this is all about a girl that is growing up during the Islamic Revolution in Iran. And so it's kind of it's her memoir and her life. And it takes place, I think she's about preteen age, and it goes up into kind of her beginning of teenage years by the end. Covers a few years. And you can tell in the story that, you know, she maybe isn't knowing a lot at that time what's going on politically. So she is learning about what's happening politically in our country at the same time as we're learning it. She's telling us, because she's a young child. And I really enjoyed how this was at the heart about a family just being a family and their day-to-day life during the midst of turmoil, during the midst of war, and then the aftermath of war when a whole new regime takes over, and kind of how you have to change the way your day-to-day life is, because, you know, suddenly she goes from one day where she doesn't have to wear a headpiece and then the next day she does. So it's like that whole, like, it's changes in philosophy of the country and how a family deals with those changes, and suddenly has to decide whether they're going to adopt those changes or be a revolutionary. And this book doesn't hold back of like being, there are times when she's really funny and humorous and I laughed, and then there are times when it's really sad. You hear about real life things that are happening during the war and things that happen in her family and to people that she knows. And so there are times when I cried. So you get both into the spectrum. So that's why I really loved it and gave it a 4.5 stars. And I immediately got the second one. So this takes place when she leaves and this is her returning later in life. Like, I think she's in her late teens or 20s in this one. I'm not for sure because I haven't started it yet. So the next one takes place later in her life when she comes back to Iran. And then the last book was the book that I have a lot of feelings about. And this is The Girl Who Drank the Moon by Kelly Barnhill. This is a middle grade fantasy. And the description I heard and what's like on the flap is that it's about a town that every year they take the youngest baby in the village and they take them to the woods and sacrifice them to the witch. There's a witch in the woods that supposedly needs the babies for some reason, is forcing the town to do this. But in reality, the witch is a good witch, and she is like, why are these people just abandoning these babies in the woods? And so she takes them to families on the other side of the woods that will then take them as their own and adopt them. So they end up in happy families. So that's what the description is on the cover. And like one day, one of these babies she feeds them starlight, but one day she feeds this baby Luna moonlight. And so she ends up giving the baby magic, and so she has to keep the witch has to keep the baby because growing up with magic makes her volatile. So that's the story of what you hear in the synopsis. And so I went into this as somebody who is an adoptive parent. I went into this thinking that, making some assumptions that I probably shouldn't have made. And that's why I don't know how to rate this book. So I have not given this a rating because I'm just not sure how to do it. And let me talk about the good things. So the things I liked about it is that the writing is really enchanting. She has a sweet way of telling a story. It's beautiful. The female characters are really fleshed out. There's the witch and then the girl Luna who becomes imagicked, and there's also a character who's always called the Mad Woman throughout the story. She's actually Luna's birth parent, which that's not a spoiler because we learn in like first 10 pages that that's who her birth mother is. And so those three characters are really fleshed out. We sympathize with each one of them throughout the story and their journey, and I really liked the focus on the female characters and getting to know them. I thought the relationships between the people were really well done, and especially those three, and getting the witch and her name is Zan and her adopted daughter Luna, and how they develop a relationship and throughout the book. And there's an overall feeling of hope that starts to build throughout the story, which is a nice thing. And so those are the things I really liked about it, and what most people rate it off of when I look on Goodreads or Amazon at reviews. The thing that, even before I get into my personal feelings, the one thing that I wasn't so excited about was there's two kind of psychic creatures in this. There's a little dragon and there's a swamp monster. What are you doing? And I kind of felt like neither of them were very well developed, that I didn't really like, I couldn't picture them in my mind very much, and they just seemed kind of like this very cliche, like, oh, it's the little dragon that thinks he's bigger than himself, and there's the swamp monster that's a poet. And those are basically the only two attributes that I could get from them, and they play a big part in the story, so I would have liked to have had a little more like diving into them as sidekick characters to get to know them better, so that their fate at the end like becomes a little more important. So that was just like a general thought. So now I'm going to go into why I don't know if I can rate this book, and that is because I think I'm coming from it from a perspective that is very different than most people's. I came in as a adoptive parent, and when I first listened to the synopsis, I thought, well, this might be, even though it's a fantasy and it's not a straight-on adoption story that involves, you know, the witch taking these babies to new families and they're taking into loving homes. So I thought, oh, well, this might be something that my children and I can read together someday. And it would start a little conversation about their history and how they came to be a part of our family and everything. So I thought it would be a nice story that I could share with them. But I personally will never share this story with my children. If they find it on their own when they're older, fine, but I never want to bring it into their lives, because the part that I didn't know, I think I made an assumption that the babies left in the woods were orphans. And not that that's like great or anything, but at least like knowing that they went to happy homes and all that stuff, like that seemed like a good storyline to me. But when you find out, and you find out very quickly, like I said, like the first 10 pages, that these aren't orphans. These are kids that are in loving families and are being forced through fear of this witch to be sacrificed. And these birth mothers and parents, but they focus in the book more on the mothers, have no idea the outcome of their children. They just know they're giving them to the witch. They don't know if the witch eats them or kills them or enslaves them. They have no idea the future outcome of their children. And this is an easy book to read, like it's a middle grade fantasy, but it took me so long to read it. It took me a couple weeks, which for me, usually a middle grade fantasy is like a 2-day read, because I had to keep putting it down because it was breaking my heart when I was hearing from these birth mothers, and just the thought of being an adoptive parent and learning someday that the birth mother had to give up their child because of fear and from force, that just ripped my heart out as a adoptive parent. Like, that would be the worst thing to find out. And I'd never want my children to get in their mind that they could have been forcefully taken from their birth mothers. So I don't feel like I could ever read this story to my kids. What are you doing, making noise? I don't feel like I could ever read this story to my children, because I would be afraid that that's the message they would be getting, because if they haven't had a full conversation with their birth parent yet, they might not really fully know what their story is. And even though I know that they weren't forcibly taken, I don't want that to ever get in their mind. And this story, I don't like begrudge Kelly Barnhill for writing it. I in fact will read other books by hers because I really liked her writing, but as someone in the adoption world, it just was a really hard story for me. And so I had a lot of feelings about it, and I just really wanted to talk it out, that like, I'm not telling you shouldn't read it, because I think that most people, those scenes would not cause as much like heartbreak as it does to me. Like, it would just be part of the story and part of the like development of the characters. But for me, and I just wanted to like tell, so if there are other adoptive parents out there that were considering reading this book, or like having this be something they can read for the children, to just maybe read it themselves before they share it with their kids, just to make sure that they understand the themes and like the nuances that are taking place, so that they can explain it better to their children and they can make their own decision whether they read it to them. And I don't know, it just gave me a lot of feelings about, like, and also if I just imagine, you know, there are plenty of birth parents out there that have kids that they are raising but have given up children for adoption, and so they might pick this book up to read to their kids they're parenting, and just picturing them reading some of these parts, like I'm trying to see if I can hold this while holding my baby. I highlighted an area. There's some times when they have a character that we never really meet, but she is a birth mother that has forcefully given up her child, and there's this paragraph where she's talking about the boy that she gave up. She's talking to her daughter, and she's saying, "Sometimes I have this dream about your brother. He would be 18 now. No, 19. I have this dream that he has dark hair and luminous skin and stars in his eyes. I dream that when he smiles, it shines for miles around. Last night I dreamed that he waited next to a tree for a girl to walk by, and he called her name and held her hand, and his heart pounded when he kissed her. What? No, I'm not crying. Why would I cry, silly thing? Anyway, it was just a dream." So having passages like that where this woman is picturing her child and the future that, like, she's having these dreams and visions about her child that she's lost, and just like the pain and that, having to like have those thoughts constantly of this child you had to give up, that I found those parts really heartbreaking. And I know I'm probably in the minority of viewing the story in that way, and so like I said, I'm not saying not to read this book. I'm just telling you a different perspective, that for me, that this book was really hard to read, and that I wouldn't read it to my children, but everybody has to make that decision for themselves, and I would still support the author and read other things. I just had a lot of feelings about it as an adoptive parent. Hey guys, sorry for the abrupt change. I just realized in review that I was about to give away a spoiler, so it was already towards the end, so I just cut that video, and I just thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.